First of all, I'd like to welcome. We're very lucky to have a talented group of panelists today, which I'd like to introduce. First, I'll start out with Hilary Beck. She's the Vice President, Head of Chemistry at Eikon Therapeutics. She received her PhD in synthetic organic chemistry from the University of Texas, Austin. Then followed that up with a American Cancer Society postdoc at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She began her industrial career at Amgen and contributed to multiple programs, including the discovery of AMG 232, which was an MDM2 inhibitor. Following her time at Amgen, Hilary served in multiple leadership roles at Flexus Biosciences, IDEA Biosciences, and Wright Therapeutics. And finally, in 2020, Hilary joined Eikon Therapeutics, where she has contributed to the discovery of multiple clinical candidates. And she's also been the inventor of over 25 patent applications there. So thank you for joining us, Hilary. We're also joined by Dean Phillips, who's the director at the Novartis Institute for Biomedical Research. Dean has over 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. He first started out with his PhD in natural product synthesis from UC Irvine, where he focused on the synthesis of glutamate receptor probes. He then joined Ligand Pharmaceuticals in 2001, where he worked on early discovery and synthesis of several compounds that eventually entered clinical trials. In 2006, he joined GNF as a research investigator. For those of you, GNF was the Genomics Institute of the Novartis Research Foundation that has now morphed into what is called the Novartis Institutes for Biomedical Research. Now, within that organization, Dean has held multiple positions during his time there, ultimately becoming Associate Director of Medicinal Chemistry in 2016, and then finally the Director in 2022. In his current role, Dean leads and co-leads many of the drug discovery projects there within and across multiple departments, focusing on early exploratory drug discovery. And also, thank you, Dean, for joining us this morning or this afternoon, depending where you are. And then lastly, we have Susanne Wright, who's the Director of Chemistry Research at Apollo Therapeutics. Susanne received a Master of Science in Chemistry with Medicinal Chemistry from the University of Glasgow in 2003. She's currently the Director of Chemistry and Research Operations at Apollo, where she oversees multiple medicinal chemistry projects. Prior to joining Apollo, Susanne was also a consultant medicinal chemist and also product manager at Wuxi AppTec. And there she supported external clients across their drug discovery portfolio and programs. She's also held medicinal chemistry positions at Takeda Pharmaceuticals, Cerium Limited, and also Informatica Limited. And throughout her whole career, she's worked across multiple target and therapeutic areas, including cardiovascular metabolism, oncology, inflammation, and CNS. So thank you, Susanne, for being here. So I think we can all agree we have a very diverse background across different pharmaceutical experiences, and I'm really looking forward to our discussions this morning. So thank you for being here. So I think I just want to sort of start out the discussion to sort of, because success, we're talking today about success in drug discovery and what does that mean, but I think we need to know, I think a lot of us have different definitions of success. So maybe for Hilary, we'll start out with you first. And from your perspective, what do you think the word success means, or what constitutes success for a drug discovery team?
Thank you very much for that question. I think it's a great question. So, as a drug discovery team, there are two ways I define success. One is delivering a molecule to our clinical colleagues to start clinical trials. But the other part of success is a quick kill. So if you're able to generate data that can drive a key no-go decision and do that in a timely manner, that's also counted as a success, because we could waste a lot of time trying to deliver a molecule that would not then be successful in the clinic. And that as you go further along that path, it gets more and more expensive. So if you can do a quick kill early, you end up being successful because you save money.
So, very interesting. Dean, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have the same thoughts as Hilary on that specifically. And I think with regards to killing those projects specifically, when the team can come together and design those experiments, really pressure test the program to enable the team to have the data to drive that kill experiment, that's really, really impactful. I think a successful drug discovery team does two things, as Hilary indicated, right? When you reach a key milestone, push a compound forward through to the clinic. But when you can really come together to reach those key decision points, whether it's a go, no go, or some other milestone, that constitutes success in my estimation as well.
Interesting. Excellent. Susanne?
Actually, it's very interesting that I have exactly the same opinions, really. The successes around, achieving project milestones, but a good, robust, data-driven decision to halt a project is equally as important as taking a project forward. I mean, these are very big measures of success, those are the headliner ones, but you've got all the small successes that you can also attribute to a project, individual attainments and things that people achieve throughout the project. For example, you start off with your target identification and your biology development, and you've got your medicinal chemistry and DMPK. And in each of those aspects of the project, you've got wins and losses. And, you want to be able to identify those to motivate your team as well. So developing good leads through, robust scientific decisions to support a project and lead it through to, preclinical candidate or even IND filing is really important.
Very interesting. Actually, Hilary, since you sort of brought up the notion of kill quickly, I'm just curious, how do you go about balancing again, especially the sort of enthusiasm of probably of your team members that, oh, there's maybe one more experiment or one more molecule. How do you sort of rein that in versus deciding to move on?
Yeah, that's okay. I just want to add that these kill experiments sometimes make teams nervous because they don't want to generate data that kills their baby project. And so what you need to do is flip the script and reward teams for making quick kills, reward teams for generating the key data, even if it makes it a no-go. And so that's what we do at Eikon is we reward teams not only for delivering, but also for making the quick kills. And then we push them through portfolio reviews to do those killer experiments, especially if they're new to drug discovery. They might, like I said, not want to do that key experiment that could potentially generate the data that would kill the project. So we encourage them and push them to do those experiments.
Let's see, interesting. Susanne, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, courage is a big part of supporting your team. It's having the courage to make that correct decision. Not everybody likes doing it. I think it's important that people are empowered to be able to do that, but also to be selfless in their decisions around the project. It doesn't have to be all about, their baby and the biology or the chemistry that they've done for 6 months, 9 months. It's got to be about what's best for the business. You can sometimes have a lot of projects ongoing at the same time, and ultimately you have to drive your portfolio the correct way and remove anything that is perhaps, not quite as superior as some of the other projects. And some of that comes down to courage and selflessness.
Interesting. No, it's good to that you mentioned some of that human elements that are required in drug discovery. Excellent point. How about you, Dean?
If I
Do you
could
have any?
add something, Chase? Yeah, no,
Sure.
I actually have had that experience running the kill experiment, and it really was, as Hilary was alluding to, teams can get a little bit anxious about that. But as this particular program was progressing, it became clear that we really need to get that last piece of data to push this program to termination. And I tell you, once we got that confirmatory bit of evidence, it felt really rewarding, almost as rewarding as one would have when they obtain a clinical candidate, because this really was so decision making that it really made sure that this program would not be resurrected. Sometimes you have that ambiguity when maybe the data isn't so clear cut, but when you have that clear cut data, whether it's from some level of toxicity or some other element that maybe shows lack of efficacy that's not really going to translate, it really drives home the point that you did the experiment the right way and you enabled the organization to make the right decision not to pursue. So that was one of the cornerstones in my fairly early part of my career, and I've leveraged that experience ever since.
You bring up an interesting point. When you did have to do this one particular project and kill it early, were you able to maybe ask for an experiment that's would be viewed as, say, a later stage type of experiment to prove that point, or were you able to do it in an earlier assay type stage of the project?
Uh, it would have been nice to do it in that earlier assay stage, but in this
Right,
particular case, the key question was really about translatability to higher species. And
right.
so until we were able to run an experiment in a higher species model, we
Mhm.
couldn't make that decision. So we received the support to do that because it was defining. It was a target that was a major target that many pharmaceutical companies were pursuing, but we were hearing rumors that many were experiencing similar findings that we had observed. And once we were able to do this experiment, which may have been unique in the industry, it was defining for the project. So sometimes you need to push it a little bit further, but I do encourage teams to try to run those experiments in less costly ways whenever possible.
Okay, interesting. Well, no, thank you for all those perspectives. I think we now have sort of identified really success could mean not just a clinical candidate, but also stopping a program early. So that's actually quite a good point to bring up. So let me move back to Hilary. Let's move on for a second. If you are running a team in a project, what do you think are some of the key or the critical skill sets that allows a team to be successful in this area?
Yeah, so I'm really focused right now on the communication within my teams. So clear communication of project priorities and project data and project strategy across the project team is really important because it's like Susanne mentioned, it's a data-driven decision. And so the data needs to be aligned and shared across the project team. So that's the first thing is this clear communication. And then the second thing that teams need is really strong leadership. That leadership enables the team to evaluate the data and make these clear decisions. And also, you need the strong leadership to bring everybody together because we can't do this. It's not just chemists that drive drug discovery, right? It's not just biologists. It's this cross-functional team. And so you need to enable the team, all the team members to feel like they're contributing and they're driving the success of the project in order to get the most out of all of them. So those are the two things, clear communication and strong leadership.
Well, thank you. Dean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, so to go along with strong leadership there, I think what really strong leadership can do is to provide a clear understanding of that mission for the project team. That comes from frequent communication and things of that sort, but really debating about the merits of the program so that everybody on the team, from the leadership roles to all of the roles and responsibilities, there's a clear understanding of what the objective is so that we can really define the ultimate goals there as well. And I think along with that, in terms of the role of the leader, is to really spend time with the team, prioritizing those activities that are really going to drive the project forward to whatever decision point is on the horizon. That is incredibly, incredibly important. So as that we have very little wasted energy and that we are really working on the top goals of the program. But if I could add a few more things in terms of the skill sets that really can allow teams to be really successful is that mutual trust and respect that everybody on that team has. That sometimes comes from strong leadership, but that also comes from the composition of the team as well. And from there, the team can celebrate those successes, whatever milestones they are, those key go, no-go decision points. But above all, especially the role of a project leader, I think it's incredibly imperative to show gratitude frequently and as vocally and as publicly as possible. I think that goes a long way towards making teams as successful as they can be. And that's something that I strive to do frequently on all the teams that I work on.
Excellent. Oh no, excellent points. Susanne, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think I, to some degree, would reiterate what both Dean and Hilary have said. Clear and open communication is always going to be the top one. You know, if you're clear and open with the rest of your team, you get much more back from them, and you're able to move forward quickly with projects. And hand in hand goes with that trust and integrity. So, you know, you've got good, open, clear communication, and team members trust each other. It allows them to have the opportunity to be much more focused, and also to be much more empowered to be able to do their job well. Let them get on with it. You know, you've got subject matter experts running the different parts of your disciplines within your team, and you need them to work on their own as well as work with you and alongside you. And I think to that point, a kind of relentless passion is really required within a scientific discipline. Everybody is really passionate, and I think that really shows through with the teams that I work with. And hand in that with goes curiosity. So, you know, always ask the right questions, be a critical thinker. And that plays into all the clear and open communication. If you can have that discussion with your team around what you're thinking about, what they're thinking about, communicate it effectively in, you know, well-structured meetings, that allows everybody to move forward quickly and make good decisions.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can dig into that a little bit, because it was also mentioned a little bit earlier about cross-functional or the team, who comprises these teams. When in your projects, are you mostly dealing with the large groups of medicinal chemists, or are you also including biologists, pharmacologists, and so forth in these meetings? And if so, how do these meetings function? Because again, how can you focus in on a specific area if one group isn't necessarily experts in that area versus others? How do you go about that?
So, you know, my past experience is quite different to the current role at Apollo. So I've worked in really large teams where it's majoritarily driven by, you know, medicinal chemists, and biology sits quite separately. And then you've got toxicology and DMPK and other spaces. At Apollo, we're a much smaller team. And it's all subject matter experts that work together. And we work cross-functionally within the team themselves. But then we also have separate set out aspects of like project meetings that only involve specific functions and disciplines. So you get small teams that get together to discuss, you know, detailed biology. Then we bring it back to the larger group meeting where you've got, you know, your cross-functional groups that all have input into the different directions that the project will potentially take. On top of that, we don't necessarily have all of the in-house expertise at Apollo. Apollo is quite a small company by comparison to, you know, a Takeda. And actually, we work with a network of consultants that we know well, we've worked with previously, that might supplement any of the, you know, areas that we wouldn't want to support ourselves. We make good decisions to have subject matter experts help us make the decisions so that the projects can advance quickly and with the best decision-making process.
Interesting. Dean, again, a little bit of a contrasting, since Novartis is a bit of a larger organization than Apollo.
Yeah, so I spend the bulk of my time currently in a variety of cross-functional team meetings that have those subject area experts as much as possible. So I think that the meetings are really devised according to the purpose of that specific meeting. So we have a series of core team meetings where it's that the core leadership of the project team really comes together across the subject area expertise. But I think when it comes down to the sub team meetings, right, those chemistry meetings. So the team that I'm involved in right now is a very large team. I lost count how large it is. It's probably 60 to 80 people across multiple sites. So this requires a lot of air traffic control, so to speak. The chemistry team is also quite large in-house here in San Diego. It's around 15 to 20 chemists plus some support from from CRO. So there's a lot of opportunities to discuss and meet and debate about the science across the different disciplines. So it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of drive to be able to stay on top of all these things simultaneously. But I think it's one of the things that one of the aspects of helping teams succeed is whatever you think you need to provide, I think you need to do 10% more. I think there's a level of generosity that people in a position of leadership on a project team really need to provide. I think there's accessibility to every member of the team so they can come by and discuss outside of project team meetings specifically. And in my role, that includes chemistry, biology, pharmacology, PK sciences, et cetera. So it's really having that open door policy as much as possible, despite how busy our schedules can be. So,
right. Interesting. So how many hours in a day do you have? More than 24. So in order to do that.
We're working on that, Chase. We're working on that.
Excellent. Hilary, I'd like to hear your opinion on this.
Yeah. So although Eikon is not as big by any means as Novartis, we also use the core team model, but our core teams are pretty small. So core teams have functional area expertise that represent that functional area. So for example, for chemistry, there's just one chemist who is in the core team, and they're representing both computational chemistry, discovery analytical chemistry, and medchem as their chemist. And then we have these sub-teams, which Dean mentions, where the medchem team will get together, but it's the chemistry representative who brings that back to the core team. Okay. And so we found that by having small core teams, we're able to make more rapid decisions. And I just want to clarify, the core team is only there to make strategic and priority decisions. The core team is not discussing data. Data is shared with the entire project team and discussed at project team meetings. So often we have to remember that core teams don't talk about data. You don't share only data with a core team. You share data broadly with the project team, but then the core team is making this strategic decision about, the next priorities based on the data. And then what's also really important is the core teams need to share their decision-making with the rest of the team, because otherwise the team feels disconnected from the strategy or disconnected from the priority. So it's really important for either the representative of the core team or even the project team leads to make sure that that information is shared across the whole project team.
Interesting. Actually, it's interesting you bring up again the sharing of the data. It sort of brings me to my next question of what tools do you put in place, not only just to share the data, but to share the other information and discussions that are occurring in some of these smaller meetings across all of the drug discovery team?
Oh, you mean that across that project team?
Yeah, the project team, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to, yeah. So this is, Eikon's the first company that I've been at that uses Slack, and I find it actually very useful. So we have Slack channels around the project teams, and all of the data is shared within that project team. So that way the whole project team has visibility on the current data, but also the history, because in Slack you can have the entire history of the data that's been going on. We also use visualization tools in order to share data and share strategy and direction. But it's really having a forum or a place where all team members can have access to the data that's critical. And for us, that tool just happened to be Slack, but I'm sure there's other solutions.
Right. Dean, how about where you are?
Yeah, so over the past, obviously we've all experienced a massive change over the last 4+ years, but the implementation of Microsoft Teams has been an absolute game changer in terms of being able to communicate in real time with the team, data, decisions, et cetera, as well as to have a dialogue with the team, especially in a situation that we find ourselves in here, where we're a large global organization where we have team members across multiple sites. And sometimes the most effective way is to share that through a Teams chat or a Teams post or what have you. And more recently, in the process of preparing for a variety of different upcoming meetings, we often are working on key documents live across in a very collaborative way. And during that process, team members who are not necessarily directly involved with the preparation of these documents can view in real time to see where the core team is progressing the efforts and what's going to be communicated. But I completely agree with Hilary in terms of the model, the core team model, and being able to communicate as much as possible with the team, whether it's data or decisions. And what we have found here in Novartis is that Microsoft Teams is a very effective tool, in much the same way as tools like Slack are as well.
Interesting. How about you, Susanne?
So we do use Teams as well. Yeah, we've got the Teams channel functionality set up. We obviously have our team meetings within Teams. For some of the meetings, some of them we hold face to face. It just depends on people's availability where they are in the world. We have, the core team as described by Hilary and Dean within Apollo, but then we've got external CROs, so we use a lot of regular virtual meetings to discuss with our CROs any of the assays or chemistry work that they are progressing with. So we use that as a good tool to keep them engaged. They don't necessarily see all of the data, but the core team do, and that tends to be within a well-maintained database where we can do data visualization, comparison thing. That's one of the big, I suppose, improvements over the last 10 or so years is just the ability to manipulate data. You're not just looking at Excel spreadsheets like you were, 15 years ago, or an advance on an Excel spreadsheet. So the use of databases is really huge for us because that allows us to share all the data in real time for everybody. We also have, assay tracking request software, which we use really heavily because we are heavily outsourced in a lot of work that we do, and it's all managed by the internal team. So we use that to make sure everything is going along as smoothly and as quickly as it possibly can. And cloud sharing opportunities to each of these teams, whether it be the CRO or the internal teams. We have those disconnected, but well utilized, either internally or externally.
Right. Interesting. So I'd like to sort of follow up a little bit. So with the teams and the projects that you've set up so far, and maybe I'll go back to Hilary. Can you describe a couple of instances, both the positive and negative, when you felt successful and these collaborations have worked? And also, can you describe a situation where it did not, it was unsuccessful, or you ran into some problems? And then what factors do you think contributed to each of those two scenarios?
Yeah, sure. I'll start with the negative one first, since you mentioned that last. When I felt least successful was when there was a misalignment between what the executive team priorities were and what the project team thought the priorities were. There was a miscommunication between the strategy. And so the team was off doing one thing, but the executive team wanted something else. And that can be really discouraging because you work really hard towards something that ends up not aligning with the strategy. And so what I wish I would have known then is how important it is to check in with the stakeholders who are really the executive team and make sure that the project is aligned with what the stakeholders want. On the flip side, when you have a flexible and nimble team, it can feel extremely successful. I've been in situations where we had extremely rapid turnaround of data, and so the team was constantly making changes, constantly shifting priorities, and the data was just coming in rapid fire, and it just felt like we were moving extremely quickly and all aligned in step with these data-driven decisions that were coming quickly at us.
Okay, interesting. How about you, Dean?
Well, I love that last example that Hilary just described. When that data is coming in, it is just fuel to the fire. Just we're data junkies, and when you get the data that helps to move a project forward as fast as possible, it really is the most rewarding experience possible. But when I think about your question, Chase, when you felt most successful and least successful, And I really equate this to, having agency versus not having agency. So in in the examples that I'm thinking of, in which the team was able to really convince leadership to make a decision, and it was fully agreed upon in line, I think that is really successful. On the flip side of that, when a project is essentially ripped out of your hands for whatever reason, it could be lack of data, lack of evidence, or poor communication by the team to leadership. That I had an experience like that, and that felt it was really that was a learning experience for sure, and one in which I really want to continue to learn from as much as possible and avoid in the future. So what it came down to there is making sure, as Hilary was just saying, having alignment, making sure that the team is aligned with leadership and what the mission is, despite how difficult the project may be. The technical feasibility, for example, may not be so straightforward. So we may have to do more work to get it to that phase where we can advance it uh, to to the next milestone. Uh, but when it was clear that we failed in that regard, it was something that we needed to learn from significantly. It was certainly something that was uncomfortable for a period of time, but a key learning experience for sure.
Interesting. And finally, how about you, Susanne, on this question?
For most successful, probably, as a chemist, it was submission of a PCT filing for progression of a compound that was ultimately submitted for IND submission and is about to go into human. So that was a huge body of work. It was 4 or 5 years worth of some of our time. And getting that milestone of just getting that PCT file in, and that was complete. We were over the line, and there was nothing else going to come out of the woodwork that was going to trump us either. So that was a great feeling. I think to get there, and there'll be more successes like that, as other compounds go into the clinic. But that was a structurally based drug design project that actually was a little unusual as well, which made it feel all the more successful because it was out with the rule of five. It was one that wasn't deemed that was ever going to end up being one that would go forward, and actually the efforts of the team really did push it forward, which was fantastic. My least successful, or maybe not least successful, but most challenging is slightly different to perhaps Dean and Hilary. And it's more around, challenging experiences working with teams all around the world when you are heavily outsourced. That can be quite a challenge. That involves a lot of effort, to move compounds around the world, move biological samples around the world, and make sure, all of the materials get to the correct places. Can actually be quite challenging because you're doing it in a different language, and you need to be very clear about what you're trying to achieve. And it can hold the project off if you don't get it right. So, it's not particularly a least successful, but just one of those challenges that we have to spend time overcoming, actually, as we go through our day-to-day life.
Interesting. Actually, can I follow up on that just a little bit more? So, because I think nowadays, I think we're all feeling this is how do you balance that sometimes, even just working on team members within the same company, not only just consultants, but across different time zones and across different countries? How do you do that? And sometimes it's hard just to schedule a quick meeting at 9 a.m. when others it's 6 p.m. And so forth. What approaches do you take?
I think you've got to be clear. A lot of our conversations are through email,
Mhm.
and you have got to be clear and concise and write good documentation that really gives straightforward details and information to the people doing the work. But it's also, meeting them in person, generating a rapport, being able to really understand from the other person's perspective. And somebody always said to me, you know, part of it is just about trust people and assume that they've got the best intentions actually, and then make sure that you provide them that avenue to come back and say, I don't quite understand your request, or can we have a quick 5-minute call, because it'll be quicker and easier to be able to decide what it is that we've got to do and how we achieve the correct alignment for the project and make everything run smoothly. So it's just being open and approachable, I think, actually, more than anything else.
Interesting. Dean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so being on the west coast of the U.S., we're not in an advantageous time zone, particularly with our colleagues who are in Basel. So there's a 9-hour time difference between the two sites. But what we have found is really work to be mutually accommodative as often as possible. So in some instances, we might have to start a meeting a bit earlier than we would normally, so 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. But then oftentimes they will return that by meeting a little bit later in the evening for them. By that time, they're usually at home. Hopefully, they've had a meal, spent a little time with their family. So sometimes those meetings are a little bit later. But I have really appreciated how accommodative our colleagues in Basel have been, as well as our colleagues in Cambridge as well, where there's only a 3-hour time difference between the two sites. But I think you just have to find that middle ground wherever possible. Make compromises where needed, and work together as a team to reach your common goals.
Excellent. How about you, Hilary?
Yeah, I agree with Dean that we need to be flexible on both sides, depending on the time zone. I think the other piece is to have some patience. So sometimes, although it would be easier just to walk up to somebody upstairs or down the hall and have the conversation, sometimes they're not in your building, and so you need to change your approach. And although that might be the pre-COVID way or pre-multi-site way that you would do things, you have to change your approach and maybe, send a message to say, hey, do you have time tomorrow that we can jump on a Zoom call or jump on a Teams call and have this discussion? So you need to be, flexible in your time zones, but also flexible in your approach.
Interesting. Well, it's fascinating because, what's evolving here is what I'm seeing is, to be successful at drug discovery, a lot of it is just, personal interactions and working with people. And even some of the things that Dean addressed. I'd like to revisit that just temporarily. He was talking about the open door policy and so forth, and recognizing the individual team members publicly and during meetings. But do you have any other strategies for how do you balance, though, ultimately, the expectations on some of these individual team members and their productivity versus some of the inevitable pressures you might be feeling from and expectations from upper management or the stakeholders of the project itself?
Yeah, I think it's really the clear communication of the priorities
Mm-hmm.
and the alignment with those stakeholders. So make sure that your team's priorities are aligned with the priorities of the stakeholders. It's the only real way to do it in my mind.
Okay. Dean, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, coming down to your question about pressures that teams may feel, I think it's important, at least from my perspective, that those pressures are not always cascaded down. I think we often, or sometimes, you can be accused of being an umbrella manager, really shielding your team from those pressures. But then it's a matter of changing the narrative or changing the language so that you can really inspire the team to reach those goals that are expected from senior leadership. And so in that regard, I think we really work together to make sure that every individual's goals and objectives are clearly aligned with the project's goals and objectives, and we review those on a fairly regular basis. How I operate within the chemistry team is I meet with every member of the team either once a month or every 2 weeks, or at least half of the team. And we go through where things are at, where we can maybe make some improvements, maybe prioritize or deprioritize. And that is on the individual basis. And that is in conjunction with the larger team as well. So it's really, as Hilary has said and Susan has said, constant communication, constant revisiting really helps us to make sure that everybody is doing the highest priority activity possible to achieve those goals and objectives. without applying additional pressure, because we don't need additional pressure in the workplace to achieve goals and objectives. We just need clear prioritization and to channel those activities towards the most productive outcomes.
I see. And Susanne, your thoughts on this too?
Yeah, I think reviewing where the project is at and people's particular actions is hugely important, and doing that on a regular basis, having regular check-ins with everybody, as Dean said, just to make sure that everybody's aligned. And also, if you get into a situation where somebody has a particular set of pressures that are coming from another project, that you have the support and the knowledge that somebody else can step in and come and help. It doesn't have to be one person's goal. You are working as a team. You are trusting each other, and giving people the opportunity to use their voice and say, actually, do you know what? I'm a bit snowed under at the moment. Can you pick this up and run with it? And I'll come back on board when I've got some more bandwidth. I think it's important to be able to have that flexibility within the team, and for you just to be observing and know that there is a need when it arises.
Okay, interesting. So I'd like to change tacks a little bit to something a little bit more specific. We've had a couple questions come in from some of the attendees, and they're wondering about some of the newer things that they might have to adapt to. Specifically, I guess we're almost inundated daily, hourly by new AI type approaches, whether it's with drug discovery or just chatting on the web with Chat GPT. But how do you incorporate this, or what do you think are the new expectations of teams and team members to either utilize or take advantage of some of the AI expertise, machine learning, chemistry, and machine learning and chemistry? Hilary, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, so what I think is really important as individuals and also as project teams is that we are adaptive to new technologies. We're not doing drug discovery the same way we did when I started my career in the early 2000s. And so AI is, I think, just another example of how you need to change the way that you do things to be more successful. So I can't go into the details of how Eikon specifically uses AI, but there are things such as you mentioned, Chat GTP, like things that you could use large data sets of both large language models, but also drug discovery data sets that you can use AI to query and get quicker answers than you could if you had to scroll through somebody's database of papers, for example. Mm-hmm. So I think AI is another tool that people will be using to enhance and accelerate drug discovery, just like there are other tools that we've been doing, I'm sure, since science started. Science is always evolving, right? It's not, that's why I really love my job. I don't do the same thing I did on Monday today. It's a completely different day, a completely new set of data, new way to get data, new assays, new experiments, and new ways to accelerate, such as AI.
I see. Interesting. How about you, Dean?
Yeah, just thinking about over the last decade or so and how AI and different computational approaches have really helped to accelerate drug discovery. I think we're really on the cusp of a new era in drug discovery with the evolution of AI, large language models, et cetera, that aim to really accelerate. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is to accelerate drug discovery, get to clinical candidates faster that benefit all humankind. Novartis is really investing heavily in this space. We can't go into details on that specifically, but suffice to say, I think this is an opportunity for all of us to really work together across the industry to advance the learnings that we can obtain from this phenomenal technology to reach new heights in our industry. It's really fantastic to think about what the future holds for us with the expectations and of AI specifically and the advancement of this new technology. I think it's going to be huge for us ultimately over the next 5 to 10 years, and really looking forward to seeing how it will not only help us to do generative chemistry, but perhaps new target discovery and how we can attack those targets, what modalities can be used, and that way we can really channel the activities specifically to that target with the right modality so that we can deliver the right drug to the right patients quicker than ever before.
Interesting. Susanne?
Yeah, I think you know, all these different types of new technologies are extremely important to the drug discovery process. We're still working out how that looks and how we can best utilize some of these many tools. I think we have to be very curious about the tools. We have to work out what those tools can do versus what you need a human to do. I heard people discuss it as an augmentation rather than just AI taking over, as it were. I think you have to have a balance. It's augmented drug discovery with these assisted tools, and it's been going on for a long time in drug discovery. With the implementation and various different structural tools, and as we move forward into the likes of AI and big data sets, we have to establish what's good data and what's bad data. What you put in and what you get out will be relevant, actually. So it's not just about the tools themselves. It's about somebody driving those tools and making the right decisions about how you can use them effectively within the drug discovery setting. So I think they're very important, and I think we just need to understand how to best use them. And yeah, that's probably
Interesting. Well, do you think people that are earlier in the in their careers, or even just still learning, still in college, graduate school, and are thinking about transitioning to, say, a biotech or a pharma in working in there, what new skill sets might you think they or recommend to them that they should have to enter this space fully ready to adapt to what might be the changing paradigm we're looking at with some of these new tools?
So I think really, they have got to have a technology bias. They want to be extremely computer literate and be able to, be a bit more flexible about the tools that they're likely to come across. Very open-minded. But yeah, just I think when we started out, or when I started out many, many years ago, we didn't have the big databases that we have now. So it's an ever evolving medium, really. So yeah, mostly it's just about having a willingness to learn how to use the technology. Perhaps replace some of the lab-based work with work on a computer and use of algorithms to determine, what is your best reaction to get to compound X. That's one of the more successful models of using AI. So something like that, where they're just really open to approaching using some of these alternative technologies to do some of the harder legwork rather than running it in lab.
I see. Oh, Dean, would you have any recommendations to somebody earlier in the stages of their career?
Yeah, definitely. Just going back to, say, graduate school, as we're going through our graduate training, much of it was very lab-based, as Susanne was just saying. We're very focused, say, if you're in organic chemistry, focus on expanding your synthetic repertoire of reactions that you can effectively run. But if I were to expand the curriculum, it would really be around data science, because so much of what we do on a daily basis is really data driven. I think that training, at least in my experience, was provided on the job and was very self-driven in many respects, at least in my early part of my career. But if there was more training earlier, particularly at the graduate school level, that could really benefit those students coming out of school sooner rather than later. So yeah, data science would be my top choice for more training.
Interesting. Hilary?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that data science training could be important, but I think the most important, and I think it was the same when I was in grad school, is just to have a a scientific curiosity and the desire to always want to learn more. As I mentioned previously, science doesn't stop. We're not doing the same thing we did in the 60s, right? We're constantly evolving. And so being able to have that sort of mindset to always wanting to learn the next new thing and to go out and spend the effort to be curious and, learn on your own or learn from your colleagues, the data science skills.
Okay. It's interesting again with these larger data sets and the data science emphasis that you were recommended. How do you go about ensuring that the output from whatever tools you might be using looking at this data, where the data you're confident that the data it was worth looking at? So that seems to be a big concern.
Yeah, so you have to be data driven. So you have to generate the validation data in order to ensure that the models are correct. And it's still an evolving process. So there's a part of it is convincing yourselves and others that the models are correct. So there's a lot of validation work that needs to go on. I think of the models as idea generators, and not always, it's not an exact science, right? So it's a way that we can be more curious, look at and find new interesting correlations, and then make the molecules that then test that validation or that correlation.
Okay, interesting. Dean, how about you?
Oh, I don't really have any more to add to that. I completely agree with everything that Hilary said. Yeah.
Excellent. Suzanne, any thoughts?
Yeah, really, it's testing the hypothesis. Be curious, find out what the question is you need to answer. Use those tools to be able to, form the question and then, find a good way to properly prosecute whether or not, your hypothesis was correct and that you can move forward with your project.
Interesting. No, these opinions are fascinating. I do want to, again, thinking about how things are evolving and changing and trying to be successful in drug discovery. Maybe I'll come back to Dean first. How do you think about, again, with your, you have over 20 years of experience. Again, even when I was still in the biotech field in the early 2000s and so forth, the rule of five seemed like it was a law of five versus now things are much different. We're into PROTACs, we're into much larger molecules that are now seem to be fair game. How do you approach using some of that sort of traditional thoughts about what a drug molecule should look like versus what it might look like in the future? Or how would you, make changes to what molecules you might recommend or work with?
Yes, definitely. It's a great question. And yeah, the rule of five is really the way I look at it now is really a guide, because so much of the work that I've been involved in over the last 15 years or so has been well beyond the rule of five, not by choice, but by the very nature of the targets that we've been pursuing. And so how do we bring that back? So I think it does require a deeper understanding of the properties which can drive the compounds forward, whatever case they may be, whatever molecular scaffold or space they may find themselves in. So it does require a deeper understanding and an expansion of the rule of five. And it really, at least the approaches that I've taken is, what are the rules that define our project within the space that we're in? Whatever sort of modality that you're pursuing, you have to have that deep understanding. And certainly if the goal is an orally delivered drug, you have to understand what are the properties necessary within the scope of this program that's going to drive those decisions. It's not going to be the same as a rule of five, which is really a guide, and from an era in which drugs looked quite differently. Now that we've expanded the target landscape, the nature of those compounds may change as well. Of course, obviously, in those instances where you have fairly well-defined structural program in which you have compounds that are well within the rule of five, it's much more straightforward to advance them. They're much more developable, at least by appearance. But when the nature of the targets have changed substantially, you've got to adapt. You have to be very flexible in that regard and have a deep understanding of the properties of your series, scaffold, and target.
I see. It's very interesting. Hilary, maybe your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree with Dean, and I'll just add that when projects need to go beyond rule of five, it's really helpful to explain to the executive team or a senior leadership team what additional resources you'll need to measure properties or time. So I often think, okay, now we're outside of rule of five, we can do this, but it's going to take us a little bit more time, or it's going to take us a little bit more resources because of X, Y, and Z. So just make sure that you're communicating that to the executive team so that they don't think that this is going to be the same trajectory as a standard rule of five project. So we can still deliver, but we're going to need a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Also, any of your thoughts, Susanne?
Yeah, I think it's when you're looking at alternative space, you've really got to have a hypothesis and use the tools that you have in your toolbox to be able to achieve the answers that you need. Come back to, make sure you give yourself extra time, make sure you are thinking about how that looks in a larger project plan and Gantt chart for, not fitting within, the conventions of what we're used to in a small molecule project. Just making sure that all of your choices come from really robust data-driven decisions and looking back at your assays.
Excellent. Actually, what I would like to do is we are running out of time very soon, but I do want to leave open for one last maybe thoughts by anybody. Do you think we missed discussing anything about how to run a successful drug program? Is there anything that you think we should have actually talked about? Or any even just last closing?
I just want to say, take time to recharge, right? Drug discovery is a team sport. It requires a lot of our energy on a daily basis. And I think it's incredibly important for your physical and mental health to take a moment to recharge whenever that is possible. Mm-hmm. I've certainly benefited from that myself. And I think it's an incredibly important attribute that every leader and every member of a team must really do.
Excellent. Thank you. Anyone else?
Maybe I can add to that and to touch on what Dean said at the very beginning about gratitude. So as a successful project team need, you have to have gratitude towards your team and make sure they're recharging themselves and giving them the space to do that. So sometimes we talk about, sort of redundancy and assays or even in medchem. If somebody's going to go on vacation, is there somebody else who could fill in, or a CRO that can fill in and run that assay? Because you have to be able to allow members to have the time they need to recharge.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And finally, Susanne.
Just value your team, value the relentless passion and everything that they bring to the office every day, and enjoy working with them. The best teams are those that work well and communicate openly and, have that great bond to work together. I think that's probably the most important thing, really.
Excellent. Well, no, I want to thank all three of you for a fascinating discussion and these invaluable comments and thoughts by each of you. So thank you very much. And Catherine, are there any last items that we would need to take care of?
No, just to say that our next webinar in May is on macrocyclic lead optimization, and registration is open on our webpage for that at the moment. And yes, just to say thanks everyone for attending. Thanks for all your questions, and thanks for the panelists for a wonderful discussion again. And we'll see you all next time.
Yeah, thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.